Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another entry into the opening paragraphs series, where we take a look at opening paragraphs to novels or short stories, and we see what we can glean from them. Today's novel is Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis, and the opening paragraph reads as such. It's a doozy, so hang on. People are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. This is the first thing I hear when I come back to the city. Blair picks me up from LAX and mutters this under her breath as her car drives up the on-ramp. She says, people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. Though that sentence shouldn't bother me, it stays in my mind for an uncomfortably long time. Nothing else seems to matter. Not the fact that I'm 18 and it's December and the ride on the plane had been rough and the couple from Santa Barbara who were sitting across from me in first class had gotten pretty drunk. Not the mud that had splattered on my legs, on the legs of my jeans, which felt kind of cold and loose earlier that day at an airport in New Hampshire. Not the stain on the arm of the wrinkled, damp shirt I wear, a shirt which had looked fresh and clean this morning. Not the tear on the neck of my gray argyle vest, which seems vaguely more Eastern than before, especially next to Blair's clean, tight jeans and her pale blue t-shirt. All of this seems irrelevant next to that one sentence. It seems easier to hear that people are afraid to merge rather than, I'm pretty sure Muriel is anorexic, or the singer on the radio crying about magnetic waves. Nothing else seems to matter to me but those 10 words. Not the warm winds which seem to propel the car down an empty asphalt freeway, or the faded smell of marijuana which still faintly permeates Blair's car. All it comes down to is that I'm a boy coming home for a month and meeting someone whom I haven't seen for 4 months, and people are afraid to merge. So what is there to be gleaned from that opening paragraph? What can we learn here? What is going on in that opening paragraph? Less Than Zero, by the way, if you have not read it, is definitely worth the investment. I maintain to this day that Bret Easton Ellis would be the preeminent novelist of our day, maybe the novelist of a generation, maybe the novelist which would redefine the great American novel, if he just went to work and started writing. But that's neither here nor there. The first thing I think that we have to understand here is setting. We're talking about Los Angeles. Los Angeles, LA, California. We're talking about a specific type of Americanism. We're talking about a specific type of Americana. We're talking about consumerism. We're talking about we're talking about the West, which is new and shiny. We're talking about the West, which is being built. We're talking about the West, which is a uniquely American, the concept of the West, the Wild West, the Westmost, the West being the newest, the West being the frontier. That's an American thing. That is an Americanism. When you talk about the West, going west, the Wild West, expanding west. And it means something. It means that we are on the verge of new ideas, new exploration, new things being discovered. We are in the fresh and the next. So that is what we have to understand when we're talking about Los Angeles in general, when we're talking about the West in general, but California, places in California to the utmost. California also cannot be uncoupled from the idea of gold. The 49ers, right? Going west to find gold, panhandling, which means, panning for gold, which means going someplace to find the gold. But what we have here is we have a character from Los Angeles going to New Hampshire, going to the east and coming back, going to the old, going to the classic, We have someone who is disembarking from what it is to be new and fresh. And we even get a little bit of that in this opening paragraph when the character is telling us, look, this morning, all my clothes were nice and clean. I was fresh until something happened. We also have, when we're talking about LA in particular, you're talking about image versus reality. We're talking about what it means to look like something versus what it means to be that something. I think anywhere in California, when you mention it, you really sort of invoke little bits of Hollywood being movies, being people pretending to be something else. So I don't think that it is any real mystery as to why LA was chosen for the themes that come up in this novel. But you also have this little mention of anorexia here. So anorexia is someone trying to, more or less, trying to look a specific way. And that is an idea. I think Muriel is anorexic, is an idea which is just kind of thrown out there, right? It is given no special precedence. It is given no particular entrance. It is not given an exit at all. It is just said, thrown out there. It is simply a reality. I think Muriel is an anorexic. And it is accepted because we're in a place where the image is more important than the reality. We also have in the setting here time. We're talking about December. So we're talking about an 18-year-old who is, we're already picking up on break from school, right? What is that break called? Everybody calls that break Christmas break. So we are automatically invoking several things with the mention of December. We're invoking death. Classically, this is what December, this is what winter represents when we're talking about classic symbolism. We're also invoking Christmas. We're talking about Christianity, we're talking about religion, and everything on a Christmas break will be held up against those ideas, those ideals. So what we have is an automatic setting for which everything which deviates from the norm and from acceptance will be contrasted to Christian ideals here. Which also, actually, Christmas, when you're talking about Christmas, you're also talking about something which lends itself to ideas of consumerism. But you're also having ideas of God versus godlessness come up in this novel. You will have stark contrasts of godlessness to the American dream presented in this novel. The next thing I think that has to be referenced here happens in the very second sentence. This is the first thing I hear when I come back to the city. We're in a first-person narrative. Anytime that you are thrown into a first-person narrative, you have to ask yourself, how reliable is the narrator? How reliable of a story are we going to be getting? Are we going to be getting something which is jaded? Is that story jaded by the particular voice presenting it? Or does that jaded reality come from the world around the individual presenting it? Meaning, you almost always have an unreliable narrator on some level because you're getting a story from someone's point of view. But is that person giving you the actual world that they see, and the world that they see accurately is a jaded world? Or does the jaded nature of the story come from the particular character? This is a sort of a nature versus nurture type idea when you're talking about narration in a story. So is it the character's nature to be jaded in the way that the story will be presented? Or is it the nurture of the environment that made that character jaded in that way? In all stories, like, that's the interesting thing about them. That's what keeps them from being just, well, hell, even the front page news these days is painted with certain paints, certain strokes, lies of omission, things like that. So we've got nowhere really to point to. The history books, even those really are political. But the jaded nature of a story is what makes it interesting. It's the reason we read it. And it's important to keep that in mind, I think, certainly when writing, but I think also when reading anything that we deem worthy of reading. Why are we reading this? From where does tell the truth but tell it slant, right? Where does that slant come into play? If we're allowing ourselves to steal lines from Emily Dickinson, the reason we read fiction is to learn people to some extent, and that slanted telling is going to help us learn things. We also learn quite a bit about our protagonist in this opening paragraph, not the least of which is our protagonist's age and what they're doing here. Our protagonist is 18 and is coming back home. I don't think it's ever mentioned, but I think it's easy to put together that our protagonist is coming home from school. From some type of school. We don't get specific yet in this opening paragraph, but we can put that together. And normally what we're doing there is we are having a coming of age story. So probably we are in a coming of age story, and we can put that together from the opening paragraph. Normally, coming of age stories happen in the New World. Here, the New World, as we're coming from Los Angeles, is the Old World, the East Coast. So we are at a standstill with what the classical type of symbolism would lead us to examine. But Bret Easton Ellis is better than that. What Bret Easton Ellis has done here is presented this world of the New World of Los Angeles being returned to by a character in the middle of coming of age. Oftentimes in novels, moving off to school. Novels, movies, television shows, any type of storytelling. Moving off to school is what sets in place the act of coming of age, right? Some type of development in that main character, some type of maturation happening. Bret Easton Ellis is better than that. Bret Easton Ellis is giving us a character returning home from school. Still, we're in that window during which many coming of age stories are told, 18. We have someone who is dressed quite fashionably, coming from Los Angeles after all. So why will we be returning home as opposed to coming of age at college? Is it because the world into which we are returning is the slant? The world to which we are returning is problematic. The world to which we are returning is not the greatest. The world to which we are returning is going to be seen through new eyes, returning back to the old place, giving new frames of reference from which that world will be examined. We also, along those lines, I'm a boy coming home for a month and meeting someone whom I haven't seen for 4 months, and people are afraid to merge. It's not just the place, it's the people who were left in the place. It's the people to whom this boy is returning. It's the people to whom our protagonist will not only return, but return to see in a new light. They've all been different places too. Have they progressed? And what happens when they get back to the old stomping grounds? Another thing, we've got to think about all of the... So we have this idea thrown out there of fear. People are afraid. Fear permeates this opening paragraph. It is mentioned in our first sentence. It is reiterated a couple sentences later. It is said again later in the paragraph, and then echoed in the very last, the third from last word, but the very last sentence in this opening paragraph. So fear is obviously something which is necessary to keep in mind. When you pair that with all of the things that we get mentioned which are a little bit out of the norm, we have the people on the plane getting drunk. We have the fact that Blair's car smells like marijuana. We have the mention of someone probably being anorexic. These are all things which, I mean, think back to your days in high school. There were advertisement campaigns aimed at you against all of these things, aimed against things like anorexia, aimed against things like getting drunk, aimed against things like marijuana. Why were all of these advertisements, all of these small propagandas aimed at you? To keep you from doing them. Why? Because they lead to waywardness and they lead to something less than fortunate. So we have all of these things being thrown around in this opening paragraph in very, very open terms. They just happen. No one's there to judge. No one's there to suffer from it. Nothing is presented in particularly harsh light. It just happens. That is the world of this novel. A world in which things people are taught to be fearful of just happen. In fact, the little thing in here which is given the most amount of wrangling from our speaker, from our protagonist, is the fact that mud had splattered on the front of his jeans. Why? Because that appearance is very, very necessary. The appearance of cleanliness is very necessary. More necessary, in fact, than smelling fresh, because marijuana still faintly permeates Blair's car, and that doesn't really matter. No one cares. The last thing that I want to talk about is that idea of people are afraid to merge on the highway in Los Angeles. What does that do? The very first sentence, people are afraid to merge on the freeways in Los Angeles. It puts in your mind a car crash. The thing which is absent is that which is necessary. People are afraid to merge on the freeways in Los Angeles. It doesn't say car crash. It's absent. But that's what's going on in here when you hear that. Why are people afraid to merge on the highway in Los Angeles? Because people get in car crashes. Why? Because people are driving like assholes down the freeway. It's dangerous. So the idea of fear, the idea of danger are put in your mind in that very first sentence. But what does it mean? People are afraid to merge on the freeways. God damn it, I keep saying it. People are afraid to merge on the freeways in Los Angeles. That keeps going through our protagonist's mind. He can't let it go. People are afraid to merge on the freeways in Los Angeles. People are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. It's not because he's afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. He's not even driving. It's because of what it means symbolically. People are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. What are we doing here? We're talking about going with the flow. People are afraid to go with the flow. People are afraid to merge into the flow. We're talking about someone who's 18 years old. To someone who's 18 years old, driving is a relatively new experience. Driving is one of the very first gateways to adulthood. Having a car, driving a car, is one of the first things, the first sort of, we don't really have in the West, if we're going to invoke the West, we don't really have a ceremony for adulthood. Nothing demarcates you becoming a man. Nothing demarcates you becoming a woman. The ideas of puberty are for much younger individuals. We don't necessarily consider that adulthood in the West. I mean, when was it we had to watch that movie? The 4th grade? The 5th grade? That's not an adult here. We don't consider that adulthood. So one of the very first ceremonies by which you become an adult in the West, in America, in the western part of America, is getting your license, your driver's license. 18 years old, this is something that our protagonist, the world of driving is a world into which our protagonist is still new. It is still exotic. We are looking at someone who still views driving as a type of adulthood. We know we're having a coming-of-age novel. We can presume we're having a coming-of-age novel at this point from the fact that we have an 18-year-old protagonist returning home, the idea of school, all of these things. So our protagonist can't get over the fact, can't get over the phrase, people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. People are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. Freeways are populated by the adults. There's no children driving on the freeway. It's adults making decisions. It's adults driving on freeways. People are afraid to partake in the adult actions in Los Angeles. People are afraid to keep going the same way that the adults are going in Los Angeles. People are afraid to join adulthood because of what adulthood means in Los Angeles. People are afraid of the dangerous things that adults do being adults in Los Angeles. People are afraid to join the same direction, the same flow, the same type of outcomes that the adults do in Los Angeles. When we say people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles, do you think Blair is speaking about adults? Do you think she's talking about her parents? Do you think she's speaking about people in their 60s? No, people in this sense are the people populating the same world as our protagonist, as Blair. Young people are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles because of what that means. Obviously, literally, they're afraid because it's dangerous. Because people are driving like assholes on the highway. But what we're talking about is people are afraid to embark on the same journey as the older people in LA. Because of what that means. That is all I have for this episode of Opening Paragraphs. opening paragraphs, the opening paragraph of Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. I hope to see you. I have a playlist of these videos here on the channel. I hope to see you in those comment sections. Let me know below how this video worked for you. It really helps me out here on the channel if you hit the like button, or if you have not subscribed, if you do subscribe. But I hope to see you again on the next video. I have new videos on this channel Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Mondays are for poetry.